All right, we are back. Episode 2. Drew, how's it going?
Uh, all right, we're restarting. I thought you were doing a light intro.
That was a light intro.
Okay, that I thought you were gonna say a little bit more than that.
All right. All right, we're back. Stepping up. Second episode of the Launch Angle Pod. Back with Drew and James here. Drew, how's it going? What's new with you? How's your week going?
Pretty good. Yeah, I mean, we anticipated that we would probably have this second episode out by now, but didn't completely honor our commitment to getting the podcast out weekly. But I think we're in a better spot here going forward. So hopefully we can do this a little bit more consistently. Yeah, week's going pretty well. Starting to get into a little bit more of a groove here back up in Pennsylvania. The hurricanes hit the area that I was working pretty hard. So, yeah, had to evacuate for that. It made a landfall pretty close to where I work and where I was living for the summer and into the fall. So, yeah, back up here and kind of getting into a groove once again during our off season.
Right. Maybe it helps to explain a little. I don't know if we ever went into what exactly you do in the first episode, so it might be
Yeah,
helpful context.
yeah. So this past summer, I graduated from my master's in nutrition, sports nutrition, June 10th. So I started my first day of work with the Tampa Bay Rays June 15th as a sports dietitian. Not working for the MLB team. I'm working with their rookie level team as well as their academy down in the Dominican Republic. So help those guys out. It's pretty Latin American heavy population. So a lot of Spanish there, just doing a lot of education and counseling with the guys one-on-one.
Right. Yeah. And the hurricane hit pretty close to the facilities down there, and also it's the off season, so that's why you're back up in
Yeah,
Pennsylvania.
right. So it was only about 10 days or 2 weeks early that I ended up coming up. But yeah, a little bit early nonetheless. Things were going well down there. It's kind of like a second spring training in a way. The instructional camp that we had is going from September 7th to October 7th, really focused on individual attention with the athletes. So it's kind of an exciting time of year in terms of nutrition because it's not as many games and you can really hone in with the athletes on their individual nutritional goals and off-season goals. That stuff will just kind of have to happen remotely now. So all good. Just kind of change gears a little bit.
Right. Yeah. What it's interesting actually to think about how sports has an off season and kind of what that looks like for baseball, kind of that more individual and close up approach for guys. Do you have an off season plan for yourself for just kind of learning new things or anything like that? Have you thought about approaching your career like that? It's kind of interesting
Yeah.
just to work in sports because you do have that natural, just built in off season. So you can kind of, at least what I would think, build some learning plans around that.
Yeah. So there's kind of an off season overall if you think about major and minor leagues, but with the population that I work with, there's a lot of rehabbing athletes, rehabbing back from injuries. So they kind of go all year round at our complex. And then there's also the Dominican Republic Academy, which I had mentioned, where a lot of the players will go back and train down there. So that kind of becomes like an extended in-person opportunity for them to train during the off season. So we'll make a trip or two down there, just kind of check in with those guys. So it's kind of like definitely a light season. We're not doing as much, but yeah, definitely. There's definitely some personal plans and progress to try to grow some skills, like improve my Spanish a little bit more. That's one thing I'm really focusing on. And then really just having more of a kind of slow and steady morning routine. I usually start work at about 6:30 or 7 a.m. Um, during the year when I'm down in Florida. So it's kind of been nice to completely design my day and, you know, ease into it a little bit, get some reading done, get some Spanish lessons in, and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I would say those are the two big things. Just read a little bit more and tackle the Spanish. Kind of try to put an exclamation mark on that and make that even stronger of a skill.
Nice. Yeah. What are you reading right now? Do you have an off-season reading plan at all or anything that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I'm actually reading a book called Upstream. I'm not sure exactly who the author is. I think it might have been Dan Heath, potentially. But that's been a really good book so far. And then, kind of in conjunction with that, I started doing this or reading this textbook. It's through the NSCA, which is the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And so they have a certification, which is the certified strength and conditioning specialist, which is kind of like the gold standard for strength conditioning in college and professional. But they actually just came out with a new certification in sports science. So I got that textbook for that certification yesterday, and I've been actually really enjoying it. It's super all encompassing between nutrition as well as like skill acquisition and a lot of data and technology kind of chapters. So it's kind of a grab bag of different things, but I think it's kind of just like a generalist manual to kind of working in performance science, which is super useful.
Yeah, totally. No, that sounds really useful. That's something I've thought about doing more is buying and reading textbooks. It's one of those things
Yeah,
you forget about it after high school or college, but you can get textbooks on Amazon, used for 30, $40. Maybe, sometimes they're more expensive than that. They can get pretty expensive, but it is a great way, especially if you're more of a text-based learner. Like I definitely am more of a text-based learner. That is something I've been meaning to do because it's like, you don't have to go fishing for all these different things. There's probably a textbook about whatever you're looking to learn with a lot of practical
yeah,
information in it. So
definitely.
that's something I think people forget about.
Yeah, I
I
think
forget about.
especially in performance science or nutrition, I would say because one of the big downsides is, you're not going to read the best thing um, in nutrition or performance science in kind of one of those self-helpy books that you see featured at the front of Barnes and Nobles, right? Unfortunately, nutrition, the good stuff is so either nuanced or basic that it's not going to become a New York Times bestseller. So I think especially with subjects like that are more science heavy, going to like you always say this, kind of like the source material um, or secondary material is even better. And I'm, not a huge fan of reading journal articles. So it's kind of nice to see a bunch of journal articles that are distilled down into a textbook that is read a little bit more like a book instead of like a one-off study. So yeah, it's good definitely for kind of a summary that's a little bit more, I guess, narrative based in a way.
Yeah, for sure, especially with stuff related to maybe less so exercise, definitely more so nutrition. Those New York Times bestseller books or the pop science books or and I don't even have that much to go to go off saying this, but it's just become a thing for me. Is as a rule, I just try not to read any of them. They can be helpful to skim and just kind of see what the arguments are for different things. But I think what people have to realize is by the time those books come out, it's they've been in writing for multiple years, in the process of being written for multiple years. The science has changed, and there's also a profit motive with selling a book.
Right.
If you're, you know, a doctor or some sort of a health professional who has some sort of stance to gain on it. It's such an interesting thing because if you write a book about one way of eating, just by the incentive there is, I feel, to just keep to hold that line in your future work. I
Right.
don't know. Maybe people would maybe people would like it if, you know, you had somebody who one year was writing all about why the vegan diet is the way to go, and then a couple of years later came out with a book just that was titled I was wrong, and all these things
Right.
I got
Yeah.
wrong on my last. Not saying a vegan diet is wrong, just illustrating a point here. I don't know if that's ever even happened or if it would ever
Yeah.
happen, but also you have incentives from publishers and things like that. So that's
Yeah. And I think also just, as somebody in the nutrition field, what people don't really realize with going to a dietitian or nutritionist is, if the person's experienced, generally they're not going to tell you to eat a certain type of diet. Like, hey, you should follow a low carb diet, keto diet, vegan diet, even, Mediterranean diet in the research we know is one of the best diets, or even like a DASH diet that you'd have for hypertension. We know that these things are great in the research, but I'm never really going to just say, hey, I think you should, unless it's a medical issue, I'm never going to say, yeah, you should just strictly adhere to the Mediterranean diet, right? Like, especially with my population, I'm not going to tell a bunch of Latin American guys, from the Dominican Republic or Venezuela, just like follow this diet that is not, you know, it's not in line with your culture, right? You're not familiar with some of these things that, some of these foods growing up, right? So it's a lot more of an individualized approach. It's not just a cookie cutter, one size fits all kind of strategy. So yeah, it's really what's best for the individual at the end of the day anyway. So it's not really useful for me to read that kind of stuff.
yeah. And I mean, I've said this before. I don't think we'll ever. I think we'll look back. I've said this to you just in private conversation, but I think we'll look back on lots of these diets and people who've made whole careers espousing one narrow way of eating as really just it's just a blunt instrument for telling people how to eat. I think we will get to a point where you can use somebody's genetics to actually tell them what diet would be best for them, and a range of other factors too. I mean,
Right.
obviously muscle mass plays a big role in just how much glucose you can take on in any one meal. So
Hmm.
so many different factors, and I think for both of us, it's a pet peeve when that stuff gets boiled down into one almost dogmatic approach to doing it, which is a bit of an
Yeah.
issue.
I think when you go one size fits all, you're not going to get met with as many wait but why questions. You need less attention span on the behalf of the person that you're providing it to, when you're making the recommendation, right? Like, you're gonna need a large attention span if I'm going to, like, a one-on-one counseling session that's an hour, for all of those why questions, if you're having a more nuanced approach. You know, and it's also the direction of information, right? Like, if you're writing a book, that's a one-way direction of information, right? I'm just writing a book that somebody's going to take, and they can't really ask you questions unless they, send you an email or something. So a one size fits all approach is a little bit more conducive, but in a counseling session, there's like a two-way flow of information, so people can ask those why questions, and things can be a little bit more individually tailored. So I think that kind of factors in here as well. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
what you almost need for a nutrition book is a choose your own adventure book, in a sense. If
Yeah,
you
right, right.
remember those, that would actually be a really cool concept to have a digital book, something online where you could click through links and actually and maybe see like frequently asked questions, a different approach, and have somebody who's actually keeping up with and constantly updating it. That would actually be the best way to publish any type of mass media, mass market nutrition book, honestly,
Yeah, yeah, I can see
because
that.
yeah, it's so much that those studies change. And another issue I too always have with the nutrition books, or kind of any pop science book for that matter, is so many of the studies cited. Number one, nobody's ever going to go actually look at. They're just going
Right.
to take the author's interpretation as a fact. And two, most people don't really have the training to read a scientific article and assess it, the different methodologies and whether, there was any bias or conflicts of interest.
The population it's done in animal
Yeah, all these different
models.
things. So yeah, it's just a general word of caution, I guess, about pop science and other things to consider. Because the flip side of that is those kind of books can become actually useful if you do take the time to learn how to evaluate a scientific study and want to go deeper. Those books can probably be a great jumping off point for somebody who's so inclined to do that sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree. Yeah, I think it's just I see I've seen a diagram, and we don't even really have show notes, but maybe we can make show notes for this podcast. But Chris Bailey, he has this book called The Productivity Project, which kind of is a little bit self-helpy, obviously, but it's kind of some more applied strategies for being a little bit more productive. And he has this really good diagram, and it's kind of just talking about the trade-off between how much fun you have while reading something and how informative it is, right? Like
Mm,
Twitter can be really fun, but it can be the lowest level of good information possible. So that's at one end of the spectrum. While a journal article can be on the complete opposite end. It's very dry, right? It's not super fun to read, but it's very informative. And then I'd say textbook is kind of around there. But another one that I know that he kind of said is in the middle is TED Talks. And that's another interesting one where I feel like it's usually about one topic. It's 20 minutes long, and it's not super nuanced. I'm just curious, do you watch TED Talks, and what are kind of your general thoughts on them?
yeah, I mean, I've obviously watched TED Talks in the past. They're not really something I seek out when trying to learn anything new, or just because I'm curious. Maybe I should. But um, a quick point though on journal articles not being fun to read. I have seen people say that part of the reason journal articles aren't fun to read is because there's also a bit of uh internally in academia and in research. You're writing for a very narrow group. You're writing for, most of the time your colleagues and people in your field and the journals that you're publishing in. And it's a
Right,
lot of journals don't have a very wide readership anyway. It's all people who have very high levels of knowledge of specific domain knowledge. So you can get away with a lot of jargon. And I've heard people say like that's because of the readership of journals, it propagates more jargon, but there's no real reason why journals can't be written in a more layperson friendly way.
mm, right.
I mean, I'm sure there is a reason, but it's something that I guess could happen, but probably won't. But it'd probably be for the greater good if it was, um,
Yeah,
or if maybe we get someday where there's some like AI that can just do that for us. You can just feed a journal article and it'll just tell you everything in plain English. Would be pretty cool. But no, I don't really seek out TED Talks. Mostly podcasts and books and articles. I'm a big fan of. I have a Kindle and Chrome. There's a great Chrome extension called Send to Kindle, where if you're on any article online, you can click this button and it'll format the article to read on Kindle and just send it directly to your Kindle. So then the next time you connect your Kindle to Wi-Fi, it'll download the article. So I'll do that when I come across anything that takes longer to read than like a minute or two on a screen, because
mm,
I hate reading on the computer. So that's been a great way to ingest more long form articles. And I've actually sent a few research articles to myself just today, actually. One about senescent cells and exercise, which was pretty interesting.
Wow. And have you read that one yet? Or have you not gotten around to it yet?
I've started to read it. Basically, the argument is that basically where we're still at is exercise is still the best treatment for clearing senescent cells over pretty much any drug that we have or that we have in the pipeline. So it's just about the
And
efficacy of exercise to reduce the kind of some of the byproducts of aging that cause us to age faster, that's what a senescent cell is. It's kind of a zombie dead cell that doesn't really contribute much and leads to downstream inflammation and other negative health promoting signals in the body.
yeah, that's pretty in depth. Where have you kind of learned about those senescent cells, and kind of who's kind of a go-to person on that in terms of reading more about that if people want to look into it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, Peter Attia is probably my go-to for what I still learn anything health related. He's who I learn anything health related from still. So Dr. Peter Attia, he's an MD. He's got a great podcast called The Drive. He's all about longevity and aging. He talks about, I'm sure senescent cells come up every other podcast for him. He
Right.
actually just put out a Twitter video talking about this too, how exercise is still the best intervention we have for aging. So he's probably my go-to on that. I have found some other people on Twitter lately who post some pretty good stuff. I don't know what exactly their credentials are, who they really are, but it's led me to some interesting journal articles.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think you told me something pretty interesting about his take on nutrition recently. Do you want to kind of go into that? I know he was really big into nutrition at one point, and he's kind of flipped in a way, or become a little bit nuanced with his thought process. Do you want to go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's always been very nuanced, but he had a recent podcast with Matt Caberlane, who's a PhD, and basically what Peter Attia said in that episode was that pretty much every year he gets less and less sure about what to believe on the nutrition science front, and there's many reasons for that. Just broad strokes, it's for people who don't know, nutrition is a very difficult field to conduct research in, because if you think about it, the gold standard for research is, a randomized double-blind clinical control study. So, you take a sample, you grab two groups of a random sampling. You have one treatment group, one control group. The people conducting the research don't know who is which group. The people in the research groups don't know who is which group. They don't know who's getting the treatment, who's getting the placebo. And then you control for as many variables as possible. And so you can just isolate the treatment effect or the potential treatment effect. And then you follow those people for a certain amount of time. That's, easy enough to do with a drug where you just have this one molecule, and maybe you have patients in a hospital where you can control things like their energy expenditure, what they're eating during the day, or other treatments they get, other things that go into their body. But if you're just talking about nutrition, it's extremely difficult to do, because you realistically can't take two significantly sized random groups of people and just lock them away in a lab for many numbers of years and watch how a specific diet impacts their life
Right.
or doesn't impact their life, and then
Yeah,
control for
become
all of the
pretty
variables.
inhumane.
Yeah, it'd be completely inhumane, completely impossible. So what nutrition research relies on very heavily is a lot of surveys and kind of retrospective studies where people are, recalling what they ate. They're entering things into a food journal. which people tend to just naturally be biased about. Most people,
Yeah.
will underreport what they ate. They may forget what they ate. All these
Right.
things.
It's the
So
Hawthorne effect. When people know that they're being watched, they change their behavior,
yeah,
and that
and
usually leads to underreporting of portion sizes, or um, over-reporting of portion size of things that are air quotes healthy ingredients versus unhealthy ingredients, and yeah, it can become pretty difficult to track. And also, a
yeah,
lot of these materials can rely on memory. So, like a food frequency questionnaire, it's
exactly.
really asking you in the last 3 months, how many times have you had certain ingredients, right? So, especially if you go to a restaurant, even like you don't know when certain ingredients are being used. You know, Restaurants love to throw in extra salt and butter that you might not even realize is in the dish. So, yeah, there's a lot of messiness that comes into play with nutrition. Um,
And so that's why, just for people who don't know, it's these are the reasons you need to just be a little bit wary about sensational headlines about this nutrition thing or that. And that's, I mean, and then we're not even talking about, different genes and body composition and all this other
right.
stuff that factors in. So
Yeah. Are
anyway,
there any pillars for you that you kind of stick to in terms of nutrition? Like, obviously, you're not focusing on every last tiny thing, but are there any, you know, 3 or 5 kind of main things that you focus on in any given day?
yeah. So I keep it very simple, and I just focus on eating as much whole foods as I can, and not the store whole foods, but whole foods, foods that have been, unadulterated, foods that are not processed. So your vegetables, your fruits, nuts, legumes, seeds, meats. When I buy meat, obviously I try to go antibiotic free, totally organic. If it's beef, grass fed. If it's chicken, a normal wild, what they'd eat in the wild type feed. Same thing with goes for fish. And so yeah, and you can make so many really delicious things with whole foods. I think it's that might be more of the trick to getting to eating healthier for a lot of people, is just learning how to cook these types of foods.
Right.
Um, because once you learn that, I mean, you can make just incredible dishes with nothing more than whole foods and some spices. So yeah, I stick to whole foods, and I try to stick to a pretty Mediterranean diet. And I'm also just kind of betting on being right that one day we will discover that a person's genes do play a big role in what they should be eating, and we'll probably have gene specific or kind of uh, gene background specific diets. And
Mhm.
I happen to be of mostly Mediterranean descent, so I just feel pretty safe sticking to a Mediterranean diet. It also just tastes
Right.
great. I enjoy it. But yeah,
Which is a
that's
huge aspect to not even just brush over too. Like, you know, you can just adhere to something that tastes really good, like a dietary pattern that tastes really good. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be Mediterranean. A lot of the athletes that I work with, or even general population people, it's not me being the food police and forcing them to eat different things. Obviously that's a little bit different if they don't like any fruits or vegetables. Then we need to start dealing with that pickiness and trying certain things. But if you only like 3 or 5 vegetables, like, great, let's just start there and get some wins by just rotating through those vegetables. So I think that when it comes to nutrition and even exercise, people really try to fight an uphill battle with themselves instead of kind of just working with themselves and kind of riding that motivational wave. So, um, yeah, I would definitely think that just stop trying to fight yourself. Your nutrition can definitely improve. But, you know, the things that I really say are varied protein and just eat it consistently throughout the day. In terms of carbohydrates, try to focus on whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. Consistently hydrate, mostly with water and maybe like a black coffee. And then eat until you're 80% full. And then consume healthy fats, so plant oils, seeds, nuts, and fatty fish. Obviously, that sounds pretty simple, but it's not easy. So those 5 things are really going to give you 80 or 90% of the benefits, in my opinion. But it's not simple. So, or it's not easy. It is simple, but it's not easy. So there's definitely a compliance aspect that comes into play, and compliance is the science, as Lane Norton says.
Yeah, no, it's certainly simple, but definitely not easy. And the hardest parts of it too are almost like consumer knowledge, really, because if you just told somebody who's never bought Whole Foods before to just go into the grocery store and you gave them just a shopping list of what you would get, that can get very expensive very quickly.
Right.
There's ways around this, depending on the brand you buy or whether you go organic or not. And there's, debates as to how much, organic actually matters in certain circumstances, which we won't get into here. But there's different stores you can shop. There's different things you can do to make it really viable for yourself. I think, that's definitely possible. It's just everything is set up to make it much easier to buy cheaper and less healthy food, which, is obvious, but is the fact.
Yeah, I would say one big thing, and just to go into kind of the organic food for a sec, I think, the things that we've kind of talked about are in nutrition pretty undeniably big boulders, right? Like those are where you're going to get the majority of your benefits from, the things that we've listed off. But people are making millions upon millions of dollars off of small pebbles. And I think a lot of the things that people really hone in on are small pebbles. So, James already eats a great diet. So the difference between, him having organic food and not having organic food, that might be another 3 to 5% gain that he's getting potentially. But if you're only getting that 3 to 5% gain when your diet is otherwise trash, and you're just going to Whole Foods and you're getting a bunch of, terrible foods for you, but they say they're organic, you're missing out on, you're walking past huge boulders and just picking up a bunch of pebbles. Other ones would be, I think fasting has some benefits for people, but in general, if your diet is brutal and you fast, I don't think that you're going to be seeing the benefits that you want to be seeing. And then other things are even more obviously small pebbles, like alkaline water or something like that. That's clearly just a small pebble. And I don't even know if it's a pebble. It might be a psychological pebble, but it's not really doing anything for your health.
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite things is health food stores and health products. I'm a total sucker for them. I will buy I'll buy any protein bar or any vegan organic snack. But the point is, the more insidious thing about those things is people. I think there's probably a lot of people who are misled by a lot of the claims of those types of products, and really, frankly, not to sound like such a cynic, but the marketing of them as just being this, healthy thing to be doing for yourself. But, the reality is plenty of, vegan organic snacks can be laden with sugar and other, kind of nefarious ingredients.
Yeah.
They may be organic and whatnot. Cane sugar is not really any different from regular sugar, and just how it impacts your body and how it can impact your long-term health. I actually just read there's Oatly, the oat milk company, is seeing a lot of backlash. Their stock has dropped considerably, and there's a movement now that a lot of coffee shops are reporting more people are ordering dairy milk because I think there's been some reports and news reports that have come out about some of the health claims that Oatly has made have been totally unsubstantiated, and then there's also the whole seed oil issue with those for people who follow that. And so Oatly's kind of coming under some heat right now, and people are responding by just drinking regular milk, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I was somebody that was kind of duped by the anti-dairy sort of movement for a while, but I think as long as you're having high quality milk and you don't have some health condition like galactosemia or like
Or
lactose intolerance.
I was going to say, if you're just lactose intolerant,
Yeah,
obviously
yeah.
it's not an option.
Like, yeah, I don't think that. Well, it is an option if you want to suffer through it, but
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times people kind of try to sow some fear too by saying, "Oh, you think that they would have studies saying that milk's bad? The big dairy is, you know, controlling all the narrative." And like, yeah, that happens to a degree, but um, you know, I don't think
Yeah. And I
it's
mean,
the end of the world having a little bit of dairy. I think
uh,
it's even worse to be deficient in calcium and be having low bone density. I think that's going to affect you a little bit more as you age.
yeah. And I mean, we'll wrap up here in a second, but just to quickly bring it back to the concept of little versus big boulders, you can also just make an educated decision based off just human evolution. What have we been drinking longer? Manufactured processed milk made from oats or cow's milk. If you're going to have just a little bit of either in your life and you want to take it to the maximum uh, degree of safety, the dairy is probably the better option in just terms
Right.
of how it's interacted with people up to this point. So that's just another quick heuristic before get lost in the weeds of all this stuff. You can prevent yourself a lot of headaches just by kind
Yeah,
of thinking at through that lens.
definitely. And to wrap on this, I think the funniest thing is, little pebble versus big boulder. A lot of the people that are opting for that oat milk to be healthy in an effort to be healthy over the cow's milk are probably having 4 pumps of simple syrup in their
Yeah,
coffee. So,
exactly.
so yeah. But all right, we'll
Cool.
wrap here,
Yeah.
and yeah, until next time.
All righty. Bye, everyone.